took root and planned its operations from an ordinary terraced house in Stoke Newington. There it is. This is a story. You'll be aware.
You keep standing into the projector shot.
Anarchy, you see. This story is about anarchism. It's about anarcho-liberalism. It's about radicalism. It's about situationism, which we'll discuss in a minute. It's also about amateurism and fantasy. And it's also about one of those notorious prosecutions of the second half of the 20th century. In its time, this story touches on Hawkwind, Withnail and I, Hari Kunzru, the punk band Chumbawamba, the comics of Grant Morrison and Alan Moore, the Math Street Preacher's Clothes, the obsessions of Luke Haynes and the Auteurs, and the contemporary playwright James Graham. It is about the changing face of the radical left, the dark allure of political violence, and of course radicalism in Stoke Newington. Germany had the Bader-Meinhof group, Italy had the Red Brigades, and Britain had the Angry Brigade. How did I find out about this? Well, I moved to Stoke Newington in 1994 to Amhurst Road. And as a music journalist, you get sent free records. And I was sent a single by Chumbawamba. This was their follow-up to Drug Pumping. You know, I get knocked down, but I get up again. So their follow-up, completely forgotten, it's called Amnesia, appropriately enough. And I'm looking at the show and it says, Amnesia, the 359 Amhurst Road remix. Why is a Chumbawamba record named after my street? What is going on? There was no internet. There was no way to find out. I rang the PR. What's going on here? The PR didn't know. It was a mystery for years until some years later, 2002, Sunday morning, my phone starts buzzing. Your road's in the papers. What's going on? It was the 30th anniversary of the bust at 359 Amhurst Road, where the Angry Brigade were arrested. And we can see it happening here. This photograph, I've had to run it through an AI upscaler because the only version I could find was that big. Was sort of like 7K. So it looks slightly strange, but you can see this is the raid taking place at 359 Amhurst Road. This is what it looks like now. Much more desirable, but it still has its strange psychogeographic resonances because Evil Dead Rise t-shirt, as you can see, the vibes are never absent. This is what Martin Bright wrote in The Observer that day in 2002. Amhurst Road hasn't changed much in the past 30 years. Rotting chunks of low-rise council blocks break up the long lines of run-down Victorian villas. There are trees, but they don't look at home. There are shops, but no banks, just the odd bureau for cashing checks. Here and there, towards the top of Amhurst Road, pockets of gentility, I think it means me, peek through the desperation at the farthest point north. As Amhurst Road ends and Stoke Newington begins, there's even a delicatessen. Well, all in all, it's pretty low-key and anonymous. You can easily blend into the surroundings if you're a criminal or a terrorist. That's my road he's slagging. I'm very fond of Amhurst Road. I'm sure lots of people here are as well. 359 Amhurst Road, I was to read, was the headquarters of the Angry Brigade, Britain's only homegrown urban terrorist group. Between August 1970 and August 1971, they were responsible for 25 bombings across London. Nobody was killed, but one person was slightly injured. But the attacks embarrassed the government so much, as the Heath's government, that they actually set up the bomb squad to deal with the Angry Brigade. This was the genesis of the bomb squad in January 1971. And the initial manhunt, which was triggered by the bombing of the Conservative Employment Secretary Robert Carr's home in Hadley Green, Hertfordshire, in January 1971, was led by a Detective Chief Superintendent Roy Havisham of the Met Test Division. And the story in itself, if you ever get a chance to get hold of this, the Angry Brigade book by Gordon Cott goes into that investigation in forensic detail. It's worthy of a movie all the time. When the police raided 359 Amhurst Road on the 20th of August 1971, they found a brown revolver, a Sten gun, a Beretta explosive detonators, and this is crucial, a children's John Bull printing set. Sir Peter Robinson and John Davies, whose homes had been bombed, and future potential targets for the Angry Brigade's actions. Among those names were Keith Joseph and Geoffrey Howe, future mainstays of Thatcherism. Subsequent police roundups and raids led to the arrest of dozens of suspects and the charging people who became known as the Stoke Newington 8. One early Angry Brigade associate, Jake Prescott, who was a burglar and a heroin addict who found a strange sort of community with the Angry Brigade people when they were squatting in West London, was already in prison for 15 years, and his handwriting had been found on the infamous communiques. Now, communiques is very important to the story. They would send messages, later done with the John Ball printer. I'm going to read to you from one of them. This is communique number 5 from the Angry Brigade. They said, "We are no mercenaries, we attack property, not people. Carr, Rollins and Waldron would all be dead if we had wished. Fascists and government agents are the only ones who attack the public. British democracy is based on more blood, terror and exploitation than any empire in history. Has a brutal police force whose crimes against people the media will not report. Now its government has declared vicious class war. Carr's industrial relations bill aims to make it a one-sided war. We have started to fight back, and the war will be won by the organised working class with bombs." That's what they would send after each action. Now, the resulting court case, we'll go back into the story of this, but in the resulting court case, this was the longest criminal trial in British legal history to date. 4 members, Stoke Newington 8, John Barker, Hilary Creek, Jim Greenhill and Anna Middleton were found guilty and jailed for 10 years. Another 4 were found not guilty. Among that 4 was a woman called Angela Weir, who would later be better known as Angela Mason, director of Stonewall. There is a possibility for afterlives, as we will see later. And as the crime journalist Duncan Campbell wrote an interview with John Barker, who had been convicted and later became a novelist, for The Guardian in 2014. While this case was, shall we say, dubious, John Barker said, "Some of the evidence against them was dubious, but he acknowledged they framed a guilty man." So they got them. They got the right people for the wrong reasons. Another convicted member of the Stoke Newington 8, Anna Middleton, continued to maintain her innocence. Afterwards, she was paroled in 1976. Her father gave an interview to BBC Radio, saying prison had had a terrible effect on her, making it impossible for her to concentrate. He also said she'd taken no part of the bombing, but she and the other defendants were good young people trying to help others. The political fallout was huge, the trial sparked huge debate, and the Stoke Newington 8 became a rallying point for the left, and we'll see how some of them changed later in life. I'm just going to show you a couple of items that give you a back, so you're not looking at an Evil Dead t-shirt the whole time. So, here's the evidence of bomb damage at Fort Knox in Ganshill. This is a device by the Angry Brigade. They would attack, obviously, symbols of capitalism, but particularly symbols of American capitalism. So this is the Ford Motor Company. As you see, not an ineffective bomb. Here we see the core of the argument. This is, I think that's Carr's kitchen. Cabinet Minister's kitchen destroyed by 2 bombs in 1971. Condemned the senseless violence. But are we thinking about the slums? Are we thinking about the way people live? One of the 2 million slums in Britain. This is from an Angry Brigade pamphlet. So this is the argument that they're making. That whatever we're accused of, whatever damage we're causing is as nothing compared to what ordinary people are suffering in 1970s Britain. This is part of the story as well. The Angry Brigade carried out, or are associated with, it's a bit murky, a drive-by shooting of the American embassy with a machine gun. And apparently the drive-by shooting was so covered and carried out so late at night that nobody noticed it had happened until a couple of days later. Is that a picture? But another communique number, actually it's not number, Friday, December 4th, 1970. The Angry Brigade doesn't claim responsibility for everything. We can make ourselves heard one way or another. We machine gunned the Spanish embassy last night in solidarity with our Basque sisters and brothers. So you've got the American embassy, you've got the Spanish embassy, both with drive-by shootings. How do we get here? How does a collection of students become so disillusioned, radicalised and deluded that they would take up violent struggle for the complete and total transformation of society from a flat in Stoke Newington? There are several things we need to look at. Obviously, there's the international political environment. It's the end of the 1960s. It is febrile. It's the time of the Vietnam War process, the collapse of hippie idealism, an international groundswell of anarchism. Everything seems to be getting worse and darker. Spain and Greece are fascist. Italy is teetering. Youth in Germany are are discovering the past of their parents, are levying accusations at the parental generation. This is what produces by the Meinhof factions and the urban guerrilla activity that goes on there, accusing the older generation of or exposing its complicity in the Holocaust. In China, Mao's Cultural Revolution is underway. It seems that the world can absolutely be transformed down to its roots, and you can erase the past and start again. The Vietnam War is escalating. In January 1966, the biggest assault of the Vietnam War so far starts. Everything is heading in the same direction. And in Italy, the 1st of May terror group kidnaps fascist Spain's attaché to the Vatican and later releases him. So the 1st of May are a big inspiration to the Angry Brigade because they are carrying out real action. If you want to see irony, in May 1966, Spanish police beat up 100 priests for protesting against police brutality. It kind of fits. So what is happening? Well, I think we all know what's happening. The greatest decade in the history of mankind is over. And as presuming Ed so consistently points out in Whittle and I, we have failed to paint it black. For the future Stoke Newington 8, this is their world. A final crisis where peace and love have failed and only war and violence can emancipate the working classes. So key to this whole stew of ideas and inspiration is the rise of situationism, which leads to student protests across Europe and les événements, apologies to the French in the room, of 1968. Now, by the way, I'll have to have a look there. These are the Stoke Newington 8. This is a poster for their protest to support them. A little bit more of a close-up there, you can see. There's Angela Weir, who becomes the literary Stonewall. Chris Bott, top right, very interesting, I'll find out more about him later. Paul J. Prescott, probably the only actual genuine working class member of the Angry Brigade. So these are the people that we're going to be talking about. But situationism, what is it? It's a much abused and little understood word. I came to do the Mount Street Preachers and Michael McLaren and the Clash. Huge fans of it. Factory Records, massively influenced by situationism. But what is it? I cannot put it better than Gordon Carr, author of The Angry Brigade. In 1967, the French Marxist philosopher Guy Debord, who he describes as a vicious paranoid megalomaniac with some interesting ideas on art, publishes his book, The Society of the Spectacle, which I'm sure you may have heard of. Debord's main thesis is that everywhere reality is being replaced by images, which in turn themselves become reality. The idea being that capitalism has reduced the world to mere spectacle. All that was once directly lived has become mere representation. We live in a world of artificiality, created images. And the purpose of the Situationist International is to create situations that disrupt that reality, that debunk the images, that show the nonsense, right? And let me show you a couple of potent images in the heritage of situationism. That's Nicky Wire from Mount Street Preachers. Yeah, I'm so modern that everything is pointless. Extreme situationist slogan there. The Manics were nourished by the idea of situationism, the idea that the unreality of the world can be exposed by outrage, by provocation, by stunts and strangeness. The other image I'll get onto in a minute. If you read, say, Grant Morrison's The Invisibles, about a team of psychedelic freedom fighters, that'll bring about. I think one of the great summations of the situationist worldview is Johnny Rotten in I Wanna Be Me. Now is the time to realise, to have real eyes. Think about it, yeah? Real eyes. One of Guy Debord's key concepts is that of recuperation, how even the most radical gesture gets commodified and turned into a product by the spectacle. The Che Guevara t-shirt, revolutionary symbol, they're flogging it in the shops. You name it. I think, once again, Guy Debord wrote an entire book about this, but it can be summed up in a quote from a film we all know. They're selling hippie wigs and Woolworths, man. Basically, once it is turned into a product, it loses its power, because everything becomes a product. So situationism is a powerful strain on the left and in Western academia at the end of the 60s and early 70s. A claque of situationist students briefly take over Strasbourg University in 1966, and they attempt to create a post-spectacle utopia. In 1967, the contagion spreads to Nanterre University in France, which is a horrible kind of nightmare concrete environment, almost a living spectacle in its own right. By 1968, it spread to the Sorbonne, and a direct failed contribution with the French state, and these are the famous événements of 1968. Amongst British students who travelled to France for these events is future Stoke Newington 8 member John Barker. Anna Mendelssohn is also deeply affected, and Chris Bott at Strathclyde. These become kind of foundational ideas for Stoke Newington. Not just that radical utopianism is possible, but also that confronting the state without violence is futile. And they bring those ideas back to Cambridge and to Essex, and they start to percolate. Now, key to these ideas is the embrace of violence. Hence, one of the greatest comic books ever published, Action, forerunner of 2000 AD, contemporary of Battle Picture Weekly. This is the issue of Action that got Action banned. This was held up in the House of Commons. It's later, this is 1976, but it very much connects with the post-hippie rejection of peaceable, rejection of idealism. This is a story in which literally the kids take over, a virus kills all the old people, and a modern day Lord of the Flies, conditioned by, let's say, Teenage Rampage or Bowie, conditioned by the idea of absolute freedom. This is the story that is told for 7p a week every Thursday. Those who read it were never the same. I'm sure that some people in the room do think that. But it's not just something that happens in pop culture. As the Strasbourg Situationists put it 5 or 6 years previously, unconsciously the new breed of delinquents, the vandal, the young thug, used violence to express his rejection of society. This kind of youth despised work, but accepted the goods that came from work. They want what the spectacle offers, with no down payment. In the end, the contradiction proves too strong. Clothes, records, motor scooters beckon him to the land of the consumer, or else they attack the laws of society itself. So what we have here is Clockwork Orange. What we have here is Lord of the Flies. What we have here is violence as the remedy. This goes into the stew of ideas behind the Angry Brigade. Now, we also see the endless wish dream of the revolutionary left here that the working classes will wake up and smash the society around them. Seldom happens, but the future Angry Brigade believe it. How did the Angry Brigade begin? Well, how does all this turn from directionless students into urban guerrillas? By 1970, many of the core future members of the group and their associates are deep into the culture of squatters' rights and claimants' unions, communal living around Notting Hill, which incredibly then was run down, poor, and not a David Cameron to be seen in sight. Right? When I first came to London in 1990, it was kind of coming towards the end of that period of Notting Hill's existence. There was still corrugated iron walls all over the place. Kate Moss had yet to move in. It was not that. I mean, I can see from in the room here, people are fully familiar with the way that Notting Hill used to be. So by 1970, they are experimenting with communal living. They are raising children together. They are outside the traditional nuclear family unit. Not long after, Anna Mendelssohn and Hilary Creek of the Stoke Newington Road are squatting at 168 Stamford Hill, which is now an Orthodox Jewish clothing shop. They become friends with John Barker and Jim Greenfield, and shared ideas come into play. A rejection of what society stands for, the idea that the underclass of claimants, squatters, and people for whom society should have no role can come together and can be a challenge, not just a challenge to get the means of living, but a challenge to the state itself. The future Stoke Newington haters throw themselves into helping local squatters and renters who are living in genuinely squatted accommodation. Greenfield actually acts as a handyman and is frankly pretty good at it. It's valued in the community. They are in a constant battle with Hackney Council, which I'm sure nobody in this room will be familiar with. It begins to feel like real politics to them, and they are equal. This is quite important. They're equal to rejecting not just the kind of faceless bourgeois democracy of the council, but also the established left. They reject the Workers' Revolutionary Party, the International Marxist Group, the International Socialists, who they come to believe are equally corrupt hierarchies, just with a slightly different hat on. They feel that the true emancipation of working people is not going to come through these structures. It's going to come from the bottom up, and it's going to come probably through violence. They're determined to resist authority and to emancipate oppressed minorities, and they are going to a lot of anarchist meetings where they become fascinated and inspired by the Spanish anarchist group 1st of May. Remember I mentioned them? Drive-by shooting guys? On the 20th of August 1967, the drive-by machine gun shooting on the US Embassy at Grover Square takes place, and a communique is sent. 1st of May bombed 2 Spanish banks in London and 1 in Liverpool. They're starting to get their hands dirty. There is The groundswell of urban guerrilla activity across Europe is coming to Britain. And in February 1970, Barker and Greenfield of the Angry Brigade, Stoke Newington Road, attend an anarchist meeting in Whitechapel hosted by Stuart Christie. These three will all be convicted at the trial. We're first of May. Say again, sorry?
Stuart Christie was acquitted.
Sorry? You're right, sorry. Absolutely correct. Christie was acquitted. Absolutely correct. We're a 1st of May figure speech, and while it's impossible to say this is exactly the moment the decision to take a violent route happens, then it seems like a pretty good candidate. According to Gordon Carr, it's from here that the Angry Brigade first start carrying out bombings on behalf of 1st of May and then their own act. Now, I just want to show you some fantastic memorabilia from which my good friend Paul Cook here has provided. This is to give you just a flavour of what that. This is kind of around and after the arrest of the Stoke Newington Road. So here we see the poster that is, Angry Brigade communicating number 9, explaining who they are, the march on Brixton Prison, whether free Jake Prescott, free Ian Percy Associate. These are, showing the extent to which the counterculture has become connected to what the Stoke Newington stand for, and also outraged by the arrest. Watch out, there's law and order about. This is benefit nights at North London College on Holloway Road. Yet more marches, Shepherd's Bush Green. It becomes kind of central to the identity of the London left, the London anti-establishment left, and the London revolutionary left. Yet more stuff. Fantastic typography, I think very relevant at the time. These are the days of letter revolution. When you kind of rub it down, little plastic things. Philip, you bought these on eBay, didn't you? So, value is rocketing. Demonstrate outside the trial. This is the statement of the Stoke Newington Defence Group, which I think contains this image here. That is extremely situationist. Laugh together, fun together, there's nothing to do with our day, our way of life. This is real beneath the pavements, the beach stuff. This is real politics of pleasure. This is real, reject work, reject reason, reject structure stuff. This kind of slogan and this kind of, very, very tight little sort of four-word manifesto stuff is extremely situationist. And these are the kind of things that the Clash are going to stencil onto their jumpsuits. And the Manic Street Preachers are going to, spray paint onto the t-shirts. Again, more stuff. Jake Prescott, who we'll talk about in a minute, the only real sort of proper work on standard of the 1780s. More demonstrations for their freedom. Now, on the bombings, I don't propose to go into full depth on all of the bombings. There's 25 of them. They're quite complicated, but let's mention a few of the more notable incidents. The first two attempts in May 1970, an Iberian Airlines plane at Heathrow, and the site of the new Paddington police station. These bombs don't go off, but a bomb on a plane is serious. I find that very hard to square with the idea that, we are simply staging bombings as moments to disrupt the spectacle. We hadn't intended to kill anyone. If you place a bomb on a plane, the likelihood that you're going to kill someone is extremely high. So I find the kind of disclaimer hard to take. Both of these bombs, when examined, show evidence of being made by the same person. They're both based around gas lighters and batteries that are used in North Sea gas appliances. So put your cooker in, this is the same kit. This is part of the route that enabled the police to finally sort of trace these people. In 1970, half a pound of gelignite causes some damage to the Iberian Airlines offices in London. Again, Spain, fascism and capitalism, these are the targets. But it is the bomb left on the doorstep of Metropolitan Commissioner John Waldron in Roehampton that gets newspaper attention. He's out. His daughter hears the explosion. And this is when the communiques start to come. And the early communiques tend to be signed things like from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or from the Wild Bunch. Obviously, violent Westerners. That's not what one would expect from, a standard political communication. But part of that is the situationist desire to step outside of the confines of politics as it is done. These are not messages that are coming from the organising committee of the working class emancipation, whatever. They're coming from strange, unusual, unsettling, incomprehensible sources, and that's what the Stoke Newington are trying to do. This is what the Angry Brigade are trying to do. They are trying to destabilise the spectacle. But to make sure that everybody knew that these communications were authentic, there needed to be some consistency. Because claiming responsibility for something, I mean, we're all old enough to remember Bob in such and such place, the IRA claimed responsibility. In order to know that they're authentic and from the same group, they had an idea. There would be consistency, there would be brand consistency. They made up a stamp of letters from a child's John Paul Princeton case, which any kid would have had at the time. And the name that they chose, which they thought up, according to Gordon Carr, the drunken Christmas party, was the Angry Brigade. So it's the bombing of Robert Carr's home in the employment sector which really triggers the investigation. Scotland Yard brings 30 officers and special branch employment together and creates the bomb squad. The Daily Mail offers a £10,000 reward for information which leads to an arrest. And the Times, this is quite ironic, the Times warns that the Angry Brigade cannot now be dismissed as a group of cranks. Some senior officers credit the group with a degree of professional skill that has seldom been experienced. Now, knowing what we know, which is there are a bunch of students, ex-students and dropouts in a flat on Amhurst Road, a degree of professional skill, well, they're obviously very, very good at faking it, because this is not Black September. This is not some kind of well-financed PLO-affiliated group of professional urban guerrillas. It's a bunch of university dropouts who've decided to take this route, and yet they've managed to fake it until they make it. If only they'd known they were looking for a handful of dropouts who used the child's John Paul print set. Bit of local interest for Hackney. One bank that they bombed is now the Stoke Newington bookshop, where I'm sure many of us have bought a lot of our books. And it briefly sported a plaque to that effect. Another highly peculiar one, on May Day 1971, the Angry Brigade bombed a genuine consumer spectacle, the still legendary boutique Bieber, home of the Art Nouveau look, home of the early 70s, circa Bowie, lots of headdresses and long flowing stuff. They call up, say there's a bomb on the site, and the store's security officer has to clear some 5,000 people from the premises. The bomb goes off in the basement, and he goes downstairs to survey the damage. He said half the basement was demolished. There were bits of hat stand all over the place. So Bieber, again, a locus of the spectacle, is attacked and damaged. A bit more on Amhurst Road. I'm sure you've all been past it. Amhurst Road goes straight into Hackney. It's right on the corner, right next to what is now Next Door Records. Used to be a carpet shop. Barker, Greenfield, Mendelssohn and Creek rented it from a paper merchant, Mr. Moses Gross, in July 1971. It was only 2 months before their arrest. They were only in there for 2 months before they were busted. Rent was £8.50 a week. What were they complaining about? They used the assumed names Mr. and Mrs. George Buchanan and Mrs. Nancy Pye because they were wanted for passing counterfeit checks. They were already on the police radar for a separate bunch of offences. And in fact, they chose Stoke Newington because it was below the political radar and considered to be a distant hinterland which nobody in their right mind would visit. Now, as someone who moved into Stoke Newington in 1994, the first time I arrived, the first time I came was to a party, I think about 1992, on Brook Road, and my then girlfriend said, go to Stoke Newington. I'd never heard of the place. Go to this party, fantastic, big rain, wonderful, wonderful time. And I opened the paper the next morning, and it said, IRA bomb factory raided in place next door to where you were at a party last night. So that was Stoke Newington when it was Stoke Newington. They use the flat to run off their communication on duplicator, obviously, but they get trapped there because Anna Mendelssohn has been staying in touch with her family in Stockport by letter, and a local informant grasses her up. Police park on the day of the raid. They park in the church car park. You know where the farmers market is? So next time you're buying your overpriced sausages, remember what happened in that car park. They're not overpriced, by the way, very good sausages. They stayed there to observe. They raided the house at 4:15 on Friday the 20th of August. Barker, Greenfield, Mendelssohn and Creek were arrested. You did not get soft treatment in Stoke Newington Police Station in those days. Greenfield was punched around the head. One policeman grabbed his testicles and said, "I'll screw your bollocks off." And Barker was dragged to see the evidence by his hair. He said one policeman called him a fucking long-haired shit cunt, and threatened to bottle its pretty face to the back of his head. Again, that was Stoke Newington when it was Stoke Newington. I'm not going to go into any detail on the trial. It is so incredibly detailed, and I get a strong sense that at least one person here really knows his way around it. But the trial of the Stoke Newington 8 begins at the Old Bailey on the 30th of May 1972. It ends on the 6th of December. There are 3 million words of transcripts, 688 exhibits, and the case hinges on whether the prosecution can prove that the explosives found at Amhurst Road actually belonged to the 8 people who were charged and had not been planted by the police. Now, those of us who've been here for a while know that Stoke Newington police in the past had a very checkered record indeed for planting things. And in fact, we could probably do an entire session just on the past of Stoke Newington police in the bad old days. It becomes... Say again?
It's on next.
Yes, great.
Nothing's changed.
This becomes, like I say, the longest criminal trial of its kind in British legal history to that point. Suffice to say that the Stoke Newington 8 do not have things pointing in their direction. As we heard, the convictions were, if not exactly sound, then the participants largely, or certainly Barbara agrees, they framed the guilty man, they got the right people for the wrong reasons. But there's an aftermath in pop culture. Urban Guerrilla by Hawkwind. During the Angry Brigade trial, Hawkwind performed a benefit concert, one of the many, many benefit concerts for them. Hawkwind had just had a number 3 hit with Silver Machine, and slated for their follow-up is Urban Guerrilla, which was inspired by the Stoke Newington 8. Unfortunately, it comes out right in the middle of an IRA bombing campaign, and people did not want to hear lyrics such as, "I'm an urban guerrilla, I make bombs in my cellar, I'm a derelict dweller, I'm a potential killer. I'm a street-fighting dancer, I'm a revolution romancer, I'm society's cancer, I'm a 2-tone panther." I've got other words if you want it. I'm a political bandit and you don't understand it. You took my dream and canned it. It's not the way I planned it. I'm society's destructor, I'm a petrol bomb constructor, I'm a cosmic light conductor, I'm the people's debt collector. Would you like to hear a little bit of Guerrilla?
Yeah.
Hands up, who likes Hawkwind? Right, hang on a minute. I know you like Hawkwind. Here we go. Right.
Lenny was smoking.
It is, yeah. Whoops, sorry. Back on. Peace and flowers and things that don't explode. Used up all of our powers trying to do it in the road. So if you want the definitive death of the hippie dream there's your little companion to Withnail and I. Hawkwind, strangely, were never a hit proposition again. Although they are still brilliant. Yeah. So, right, what about the afterlife of Stoke Newington 8? What happened to them after their release? Here they are. I love this picture. They look like pulp. Fantastic. Everything Tashes, Captain, Tuber, Lager. You can smell the roll-ups. Just
Sorry to interrupt again, but that's not just the Stoke Newington 8. There's the 4 who were acquitted.
Yeah.
But at least one guy in there was not a member of the jury.
Is this the guy with the guy with
the guy with the furry coat is
Yes.
a guy called Chris Broad, who's now deceased, who was on the defence committee, but he wasn't actually a defendant.
Fantastic.
So that is obviously not a picture
Sorry,
of the
we
Stoke
can't
Newington 8.
hear.
Okay, so I'll just relay that. So this is some of the Stoke Newington 8, but some people who are not. The guy in the middle with the caftan is Chris
Broad.
Chris Broad, who's on the defence committee. I think we can see Angela. What's her name there? Can't we? Yeah, Angela Weir. Not entirely sure who the kind of Cliff Mitchell guy at the top of the yeah. So this is post the case, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, Stuart Christie's the guy with long hair and moustache.
Yeah, and it's also, can I just say, the other 2 people who aren't there obviously are Ian Purdy and Jake Prescott, because they're already in prison.
Yeah.
which we haven't heard that much about. Yeah.
A little bit coming up. Not a lot on him fairly, I'm afraid, but I've got a bit on Jake.
On Jake, yeah.
So what happens to the Stoke Newington? So what happens to the Angry Brigade after their release? Some 30 years after the bombing of Robert Carr's home, Jake Prescott, the aforementioned burglar, heroin guy, had been jailed for 10 years in 1971. He issued a public apology to Robert Carr and sent him a Christmas card. Prescott, he got involved in the Angry Brigade. He said that the apology had helped him to rebuild his life. When Robert Carr accepted my apology, it allowed me to move on. 30 years on, I now feel the time has come to make my admission public. He said that, he, like I say, the only working class member of the brigade, he said that he was the one who was angry, and the people he met were more like the slightly cross brigade. Lord Carr, who had been the intended victim of the bomb, didn't comment, but Lady Carr said, I still remember a Christmas card Jake Prescott sent us, and it was the best Christmas present I ever had.
Yeah. Can I just...
Yes?
I'm Jake's wife, so...
Right! Oh my God!
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
That's all right. No, it's fine. It's just that I know that came from Martin's article. So it wasn't. I mean, he wrote to Robert Carr because he'd been doing a 12-step program,
yes,
and he wanted to do all the amends and stuff. And he got a letter back. It wasn't. Yeah, he did get a letter back saying thank you for the apology. And I suppose the only other comment I'd just quickly like to make is that you said that Jake was the only working class member.
Yeah.
He was also the only one who had the skills needed for the explosives element of the whole drama.
So Jake's the unsung hero of the Angry Brigade.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually.
Right. Thank you. That's brilliant.
I mean, he was a lot more significant than I think. I think the talk.
I'm trying to follow around it as much as I can. Chris Bott, who was acquitted, helped to found the ill-fated left-wing Sunday newspaper, The News on Sunday, if anyone remembers that. John Barker became a writer, first on his prison experiences in Bending Bars, which came out in 2006, and then he wrote crime novels. Unfortunately, he found himself back in jail in 1990 when he and Greenfield got involved in a major cannabis importation scheme. And when he went inside, he said prison conditions have really got an awful lot worse. He was very disappointed. Barker's partner, Anna Mendelsohn, who was the only prisoner to be released early on parole, she had become very ill in prison, but she dedicated the rest of her life to education, art, and poetry. She wrote under the name of Grace Lake, and she died in 2009. Hilary Creek completed a degree and rebuilt her life following her release. She said, this is the Observer, basically, I'm not ashamed of anything I've done. But then she got quite angry with her interviewer. You use the word bomb, but be careful about using it because nowadays that's such a value-loaded term. You think of Omar, you're not thinking of half-pound jelly-bag that causes small structural damage. It's important to put things in perspective. It wasn't so much the criminal damage, it was the fact that it made them look stupid that she said was the disrupting thing. John Barker put it more prosaically. We were not that serious, he said. We never took it seriously anyway. What I mean is that like many people then and now, we smoked a lot of dope and spent a lot of time having a good time. So that's the core of the Angry Brigade story, that for all the panic that was engendered in the establishment of the day, for all the kind of imported French theory and the notion that we were about to transform and overturn society, reality itself was going to be vaporised, all the subsequent lionisation, you have to sort of ask, what did it achieve, what did it actually mean, what did it stand for in the long term? There was no programme, there was no, we will replace this institution A with institution B, because they were not programmed people. There is they become the subject of plays by James Graham. I mean, Jake Arnott's novel Johnny Come Home, 2006, Harry Kundrew's My Revolutions, Luke Haynes of the Auteurs have written songs about them. They got a Chumbawamba remix, God, how can you get that? But you have to sort of ask, where does it lead? What's the current and the direct? I'm sure we may have to point after this about this. Did they themselves end up subsumed into the spectacle? That the Angry Brigade are now a thing as on the spectacle, insofar as many of the other political currents that they talked about. They set out to destroy it, maybe they became part of it, I don't know. But it's a fascinating part of certainly the story, and for a place that I walk past literally every day for 30 years, to be the locus of this political activity, I found it absolutely astonishing. And I hope you find it interesting, and I hope, because we've clearly got two absolute experts here, I hope I haven't got too many things glaringly wrong. But if anybody has any questions or things that they'd like to ask about, I might best direct towards you two rather than me. Do you have questions?
Yeah, sorry, somebody, when I spoke earlier, somebody said couldn't hear at the back. So it's a bit of an omission not actually having a microphone, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're planning to take questions. I was originally going to ask a question about what research you did. I think you answered that in the negative through it. I appreciate you're interested as a music journalist, and therefore you're interested in all the burlesque and the overstatement of situationism, which frankly is not a credible theory of revolution, although if there's a situationist in it, and there are some, they might disagree with me. But it's great for slogans. I mean, possibly the best known populariser of situationist slogans would be Joni Reid, who did graphics for the Sex Pistols. And in Up They Rise, his book, he says he wasn't really interested in the ideology, he just liked the slogan.
Yeah.
I think that goes for a lot of people. It's completely different from anarchism. Stuart Christie was an anarchist. He was actually an apprentice gas fitter, so the idea that there was no one else other than Jake Prescott in this picture who was working class is a bit remiss. He died in 2020, if you didn't know. And when he was alive, he used to sue people who said anything about him that he'd been acquitted of. So, anybody who, well, there was a smear obituary of the late Albert Meltzer done by Nicholas Walter in The Guardian, and it claims some things about Stuart which Stuart successfully sued about. So he is quite a significant figure in British anarchism, and whether he was involved in the Angry Brigade or not was entirely up to him. So to admit, and he's dead. So there you go.
Okay. I think we probably need to wrap up. Is there any other questions or anything? Janet, we need to...
You've got time.
Okay.
And apologies about the microphone.
Yeah.
None of the microphones in Sutton House worked. So.
Right, okay.
I will relay your question loudly when you've asked it.
I was just wondering why Stoke Newington?
Why Stoke Newington?
Why not Salford? I mean, I wondered if it was the fact that they congregated in Amhurst Road had anything to do with the history of dissent, Protestant dissenting in the 18th century.
So the question is, why did they choose Stoke Newington as the base of operations, and was it to do with the history of dissent in the area, was it to do with the history of non-conformity? From my reading, it doesn't seem to be really deeply connected to that. It seems to be much more that Stoke Newington was kind of terra incognita. It was off the map. It was cheap. It was a place you could disappear. It was a place where you could carry out your activities, not exactly under the watchful eye of a particularly dedicated police force. You actually had a fairly corrupt police force, which was more interested in enriching its individual members and maintaining its power on the streets than clearing up a major case like this. For instance, this is deep in the time of the regular fit-up. I'm sure we'll be hearing lots more about this in your presentation. Deep in the time of the Bent Copper. So it just seems to be a good place to hide. That's the best.
There were lots of communes, and lots of us came to Stoke Newington because it was cheap, but also because it was radical.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I came in '69, but I came deliberately, politically, as a choice, because there were lots of lefty stuff going around. There was lots of women's communes. There was lots of. You didn't refer to the fact that there were women. That feminism had any impact on this, and radical feminism did have a lot of impact on both the theory and the practice of the women in this group, who I knew personally, some of them. And there was also connection to the IRA and to Northern Ireland. I mean, there is a kind of much larger revolutionary political context for this in this area at that time, as I can personally testify to, because I was part of it. And you need to go back way before the 1990s, the 60s. It was already a kind of place where people came to, to live and to practice their revolutionary theories of different kinds. I mean, the left was very active in Stoke Newington. I just want to say that.
Down the back.
I think some of those of us who were there feel that the anger of the Angry Brigade has been somewhat trivialised. The James Graham player, he's a wonderful playwright, but his play just treats them as a rather stupid bunch of middle-class kids. I mean, I was never particularly left, but the anger which embraced what went on in France and the Red Brigade, the Father Meinhof gang, I think some people now don't get it.
Yeah. No, he's right. Agreed.
Um,
LSE, first occupation before 68.
yeah. Anybody else with any thoughts? Lovely. Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming. I hope you found it interesting, stimulating. We couldn't cover everything, obviously, because we'd be here for a little time. But I hope you found it entertaining. And thank you.